Okay, so I'm very pleased to welcome Nick Everett, who is a Senior Procurement Manager at Telent, to join me on the podcast today. Thanks very much for joining me, Nick.
You're welcome.
How are you doing today?
I'm good, thanks, Johnny. Really good. So thank you for inviting me. Hopefully this will be a very good conversation.
No, I'm very much looking forward to it. We're going to be talking about services procurement,
Yes.
my favourite subject, and really just the case study for change. Change, some people see it as being too complicated, too difficult. Maybe some people don't realise the benefits of making change in this area, but this is a great opportunity to look at what you've done at Telent and how that change has taken place and what's come out of it, really. So I'm really pleased to be able to bring that conversation to other people in the market and just share some of the challenges and thoughts and insights that you've come across in this journey. So, yeah.
Yeah, I'll do my best.
Excellent stuff. Okay, so before we dive into that side of it, could you just give a little bit of a background on yourself and what you do and how you came to be in this position in procurement?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been in procurement for coming on 20 years now. Gosh, it seems such a long time when you say it out loud. So actually, my journey started, I was studying out in America and I was in a pub and someone said, "What do you want to do with your life?" And I just said, "I want to spend other people's money." Didn't think it was going to end up in IT and technology. I was thinking more glamorous things like handbags and shoes and things like that. But that's kind of where my journey started for me looking for a role. And I did end up in technology from the get-go. And I cycled through lots of different job roles in procurement, from just doing contract changes through to just buying widgets and things like that. And over the years, I've really become quite passionate about services. And in a couple of my roles, I had the opportunity to really delve into that from a global perspective and local. So I knew of Telent when I was in one of my first jobs, and they were a supplier to me. So I've seen Telent throughout different iterations of what I've been doing. And when it came up to join them, it was a great fit. And that's where I am now currently. And I'm really looking at how we use service procurement within the organisation. So, yeah, I can pull on lots of different areas of expertise that I've gained and knowledge over the years and, yeah, put it to good use.
Absolutely, and it's quite interesting when you see that sort of circularity about you having Telent as a supplier and now you being part of the team at Telent. So just going back to kind of your early forays into procurement, it's quite interesting that you've worked across different areas of procurement. I wouldn't say everyone is necessarily drawn to the services side of things. Services categories, you tend to find some people would almost rather sit in a much more of a transactional category, more around kind of like goods, like you say, widgets, that sort of thing. What for you were the kind of key differences between what you were doing when you were managing more goods and materials type procurement versus when you started addressing some of the kind of like more services related categories?
Yeah, so at the beginning I was buying Apple Macs for design houses and things like that. And it's, to your point, really transactional. It's you need something and you need it by a next date and you can negotiate prices based on quantities of what you're buying. When I went to Airwave Solutions, which was my first foray with Telent as a supplier, it was the London 2012 Olympics. And I got given the supplier contract to manage, and that was the delivery and services of the radios that were used at different venues. So they couldn't use mobile phones because the networks were potentially flagged as not fit for purpose from a stability point of view when it came to so many people in the UK using their mobiles at one time. So they chose to use a radio network, which our emergency services use. So Airwave Solutions was chosen at the time to implement those radios, and it was a German supplier, Riedel, at the time. And it was my first foray into actually what services meant versus I'm buying or renting radios.
Yeah.
What was that difference? And it was really interesting to unpick the services side where you've got people. What do they do? How do you actually pay for it? What are the laws? What are the rules? Versus well, I can just buy a cable or earpieces or any accessories that go with it really easily. That's fine. That's already been sort of, laid out. And it was really interesting to come up against certain problems within that delivery, because nothing's simple, nothing goes plain sailing ever.
Yeah.
And how, in a procurement perspective, you actually deal with that from contract through to actually you're dealing with people and emotions. So it really caught me, a little spark in me to go, oh, this is actually really interesting. Really interesting. And I moved on to different companies after that, and I got into Sage, which was looking at how TA is done across a global platform, and with that, contingent workers,
Right.
and how they're procured. So it was another element to that category.
Yeah.
So it wasn't until I joined Telent and I had the opportunity to take the labour category on full time that I went back to that whole services procurement, and I could use some of that experience not only from a global perspective but also from a start to finish from the London 2012 Olympics on actually how do you run a programme, what do you need to consider when you're actually going out to market, and almost looking at how do you expect a supplier to act and behave and deliver if you need them to do a specific thing.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting. I think one of the things that I find fascinating about this is you obviously have certain personality traits of things that interest you, and I feel like it's. Would you say it's like a problem solving mentality? What are the personality traits within you that draw you to the problems of managing the procurement of services versus the procurement of more goods and materials? Because I feel like you say, the procurement of goods feels more like an established solved problem with clear routes. What is it about the chaos or the challenges that draws you into more that services side?
You hit the nail on the head. It's pure problem solving.
Yeah.
I love that. It's a challenge. It's exciting. If you like that side of procurement and understanding how to articulate something from a contractual perspective and then an operational perspective, and how do you marry those two so that you can get your end result without friction, without legal issues, it's fascinating, and that's what drives me. It's that problem solving.
Yeah, I think that's something that I see as a trait that definitely comes to the forefront with people who work in this area. That kind of problem solving mentality, also generally kind of like adaptability, which is an essential kind of inherent part of that. But the other thing I just want to draw on in terms of your background, which I think is really interesting, is that crossover between like contingent workforce categories, talent acquisition, labour categories, and outsourced services. Because I heard it recently described, Everest Research, we had an interesting conversation with those guys recently, doing some good research in this area, and they described services procurement as a procurement problem with a talent twist. And I thought that was quite a clever way to describe it, because
it's like a cocktail.
Yeah, exactly. And I see it as this interesting confluence, and it creates some grey areas, because ultimately it is an inherent part of a very big part of what organisations procure, but it's also how they get work done. So I think, do you feel it's valuable, the fact that you've had that experience dealing with that kind of more kind of like worker and talent centric side of things as well?
Definitely. The ability to be able to articulate the difference between TA and services procurement has been valuable, definitely. And there are so many people that don't know the difference. And often the fight that I found that we have is articulating that within the business that you work in. How do you get people on board who don't work in these areas to fully understand the implications of what is contingent and then what is services procurement? And through our journey in Telent and having that problem statement of IR35 and what that implication means for us as an organisation, being able to identify myself and educate others as to what that really does look like has been really key in bringing people on board and feeling very comfortable with what we're actually doing.
Yeah, it's so important, like you say, to get that internal validation. Misclassification, it is a big driver. It obviously was one of the key drivers for you guys when you kind of got started on this. So there's the kind of risk and compliance elements of managing the fact that these are, ultimately people doing work. But the other side of it that I find really fascinating is it's just work capacity. So it's a channel to get things done. And I think if organisations, one of the things that's becoming clear is seeing how organisations are trying to line up the different channels, whether it's freelancers, whether it's contractors, internal capacity, outsourced services procurement. These are various different ways that the organisation can get work done. And actually, what we see is most often the gap is around the services procurement side because it's just less mature for most organisations and in the market in general. But when you map that together, well, then suddenly the organisation can start to understand, what's the best use of our resources. Is that something? So obviously, it'd be great to get on to talking about the journey that you've been on within Telent with this. But I'd be interested to know whether that is something that has come up as well in terms of that overall understanding of like, what are our options for getting things done? What's our capacity and capability?
Absolutely. So it's very much thought of, well, I use this route. I go and phone up Joe Blogs and I get what I want done. It's the way I've been doing it. I've put it in an email and, I raise a purchase order and jobs are good. And so it is trying to educate and bring people along that journey of it's not really appropriate anymore. That isn't the way we do it. That's not how you're going to secure best practice. We have instances within our problem statement before, not only of IR35, but it was evident that suppliers also didn't have a clear-cut set of requirements and deliverables to work to. So you then get creep. That's costly. Time impact.
So what I'd like to come on to next is just to look at your journey, the services procurement journey within Telent so far. So how did it start? What were the kind of like first changes that happened, and what were the steps that have taken place?
Yeah, great question, because it has been a great journey, difficult but great. So the first thing was around IR35. That was a catalyst to get the conversation going. And when you start to present to senior management that you can't truly articulate what your purchasing habits are and how can you determine who is inside or outside IR35, it raises a few eyebrows, sets a few people on edge.
Yeah.
So it was then a task of, well, how do you combat it? And we had some conversations internally in procurement, and it was around, well, we've got some MSPs that use certain VMS tools. So what does that look like? What's up and coming in the industry? And we found Zivio and Mawson's, who are our current MSP. And it was really about educating the seniors who make the decisions on how this will combat that evidence-based decision on whether or not it is inside or outside IR35. It then became really apparent the additional benefits a true system that looks at services procurement like Zivio can offer. So that was then, as I love to coin the term, it's self-service with guardrails. Yep. So you can have a huge volume of outsourced services, which we do in Telent. We have that volume, and being able to identify what's disguised, contingent workers. And once you've sorted that out, that was actually quite easy to deal with, because an MSP has had years of dealing with contingent workforces. We see that in lots of different roundtables and expos and things. So once that they were identified, that was triaged and dealt with. What we were left with is still a huge spend and requirement on services. So Xivio came into its own in that respect, and it was using the tool to say, right, what does good look like when it comes to articulating the services you need? How do you marry that with behaviours? How do you marry that with internal processes, DAs? Well, you know, we've got still a procurement lens on it. So how do you get value for money? And it really has been an interesting 2 years. So we're coming up into our third year, and I can absolutely say, hand on heart, it's been a fascinating journey. And we now have our teams that use the system for statements of work. We've adapted it to use something which we call safety critical. So that is where you do buy skill sets for maybe a shift or two, and that's a really fast reactive requirement. And Xivio was flexible. There was the agility to actually mold the system to answer that problem statement of how do you get someone that's potentially on their mobile phone down in the underground doing work, and they need someone for the next shift. How can they purchase that service? And we've got to the point now where we're able to do that, and it's a completely yin and yang from where we were. It's fabulous. So that's where we currently are. We're implementing the safety critical. We have statements of work. We can prove we're compliant. You know, we do have a decision tool that shows our stakeholders if it needs to be contingent worker or if it's actually a true outsourced service that they require.
And that decision tool is part of the MSP service, and they're the kind of they're using their expertise to program how that works.
They are indeed. So they have IR35 experts, and we've relied on them to produce a tool which they're very proud of, which they should be, and it enables us to make that initial decision to say, right, you need to follow this avenue, or you can go down through HR and go and get your contingent workforce. And then you have the true STS determinations from there. But it really is that fork in the road that directs internal stakeholders on where they should go. And it's been really, really valuable.
And so from a technology kind of like user journey, if they go through it's the FCOS, Mawson's FCOS tool, isn't it?
Yeah.
Shout out to Chris Burke and the team at Mawson for that. So effectively a user journey would be they go through the status determination with the FCOS tool, and then they either go through the vendor management system if it's a contingent workforce engagement, or they go through Xivio if it's a services procurement SOW type engagement.
Yeah.
It's brilliant to see that in practice, because a lot of people, in my view, mistakenly think that's more complicated than it actually is.
Oh, it's not. It's 31 questions that you can do in 10 minutes. And you then have a certificate at the end that can be used. It's there on file as an audit trail. And you know as well as I do, audit trails are paramount to making sure that you can prove you're compliant. And having a tool where that is a one-stop shop, where you can nip out, do your FCOS, come back, it records everything, go out, put your statement of work out into the supplier domain for answer, and it's just documented every single step of the way. And we've managed to load in loads of suppliers. And I think what I've heard is, well, how do you combat that pre-approved supply chain? Do you not have to go out just to anyone on Google? No, you don't. And we've locked it down, which has been a huge help. So we only use pre-approved, audited suppliers.
Yeah.
Because we're in a safety critical environment, we have to. We can't just be going out to anybody. So again, those guardrails have been laid down, and we can then safely say to a project manager, to an engineer, go and ask that question. Use the portal. I've had the question, well, aren't you afraid of your own job being lost because you've got a tool that does it? No, it frees us up to do the far more complex activities, and it's just a tool. It is a fabulous mechanism to get the non-complex, high volume churn work out there that people can do it themselves, and they can learn. And what better way to have a project manager or an engineer that can write their own scope, understand how the supplier responds, and know how to articulate everything from scope to standards that are needed, milestones. If they do it themselves, they're going to have a far better program than if I do it for them. They'll actually be able to understand it far better. So we're educating people, and it's a success because we actually haven't had scope creep. We don't get settlement issues that can come from it at the end of a program because Joe Bloggs said you could do this and we've said, well, no, we can't, and we're not going to get it back from the client. You know, it stops those arguments.
And that's significant potential cost savings in amongst that as well, isn't there? I think the self-service element is critical. Ultimately, from a scalability perspective as well, for procurement, if you've got a sophisticated, well-educated procurement team like you guys have, it's still not going to be a massive team. So if you've got a self-service element to it and a technology enabler in the middle, then it allows you to manage that scale, keep an eye on things. Not, the procurement team isn't getting in anyone's way. It's facilitating and adding, using the technology to just basically streamline it.
Yeah.
So as you say, it actually elevates what the procurement function can deliver, both to their internal stakeholders and the supply chain, but also in terms of the data and the compliance that is delivered to the business overall. So like you say, some people might look at it and go, oh, is this going to take away my job? No, it's just going to make your job better, really.
Absolutely. I mean, to have the time and the capacity to actually go out and have those supplier relationships, go out, find out who's new in the market, what are people up to. If we're bogged down with doing that churn of issuing scopes, looking at quotes, then when are we supposed to have time to do the more strategic bits, if you like? And that is strategic. That is looking at proposing to a business, okay, this is what your supply chain could look like. You've got X, Y, and Z now, but actually these guys are doing some great technology bits for you in the future with regards to, I don't know, CCTV or something. So let's look at them, get them in, let's have some conversations. But I couldn't do that if I was doing all of the noise and the churn that would come through. So it will get better and better. The more elements we add using Mawson and Zivio as a platform, the more we get freed up to do those SRM activities, which is fab, because that to me is where procurement should be. We are a strategic function, and it's all out there on LinkedIn with us as a community saying we are strategic, but how many times do I hear, but yeah, I'm bogged down with all of the churn?
Yeah. And this is something that I've heard SIPs talking about recently in terms of like bringing great talent into procurement and retaining great talent in procurement. I think it's impossible to do that, especially with talent coming into the market now, if you don't have effective use of processes and technology within your business. Because if you hire someone who's really smart, they're going to be data driven. Everybody is these days. And they're technology driven as well. And they'll use a lot of technology in their personal life. So if people are coming into some of these organizations where procurement are doing very manual processes and they're very transactional, I just can't see how they can retain talent. People are going to come in and think, this wasn't what I was expecting. Yeah. So if there is a more sophisticated process, that whole thing of like, is this going to take away my job? If people are working in that kind of manual transactional capacity, that's going to go away. That's the thing that's going to go away, not the strategic stuff. Just like companies are not going to be able to do that because they won't be able to get the talent to do it, and it's just totally inefficient.
Yeah, absolutely. And being in procurement for as long as I have, it's always, well, what are you going to do with your tail spend? Can you give me a list of your suppliers that do X, Y, and Z? And so many times I've been in organisations where we don't have all of that data. We have spend cubes coming out of our eyes. Absolutely, of course we do. But that knowledge of exactly what those suppliers do, what they can bring to the table, that's what we need to start focusing on when it comes to services procurement and spending the time understanding that, rather than that noise. And, the AI tool, how great is that as part of Zivio? And that, again, it helps the noise. It helps it helps with the drafting of those requirements. So to your point of it taking away those basic elements of a job, yeah, great. Use the AI feature, then we can spend far more time doing the strategic bit. So I'm not surprised it's a topic of conversation with SIPs, because I hear it in the areas that I'm in as well.
Yeah, and pardon me, this idea of making procurement truly more strategic, I think what you've done and what you're doing within Telent and the broader group is very impactful, and you can't argue with it, and you can put the data behind it, and that's something that's very important to the C-suite, where they're trying to understand, what is the most effective use of our resources, what are our risks, how do we operate with the supply chain, and things that you're talking about in terms of like understanding capabilities within your supply chain. That we're seeing that a lot more now, where people are using their services procurement supply chain within Xivio for things like horizon planning.
Yes.
So, okay, future technology requirements coming through, we need to be planning who's got that, who's upskilling themselves to be able to do that, what new suppliers do we need to bring into the supply chain. And we're seeing stuff like much more use of things like expressions of interest.
Yeah. Where
organizations are saying, okay, here's something that we've got coming through the pipeline, who has the capabilities to potentially do this, and that just shortcuts it when that does need to be turned into an RFP and actually just pushed through. So yeah, I think it's undeniable when you actually are doing what you guys are doing that it does make it more strategic, and you're reaping the benefits of that. And I think that hopefully for a lot of people can take away that fear factor of just change, because that's one of the blockers. And as I said before, in terms of looking at that resistance to change, some of that would have come for you guys at the very beginning of the process.
Yes.
In terms of getting that business case in place. So if you kind of look back to that initial business case, obviously there were risks around misclassification, which were a significant catalyst for it. But if you look at the hurdles around creating a business case and what kind of got Telent through those hurdles, what would you see as the kind of main areas where the rest of the business might sort of go, we don't normally do that, or do we really need to do this? What were the kind of, because nobody really likes change, do they?
No, we all fight against change. You get the odd few that thrive in it, but yeah. So really it was the IR35, which was the strapline. That's what got us in front of the senior leadership team. And it was very much about the savings that you could make if you put through statements of work with correct scopes and went out competitively to your suppliers.
Massive difference.
And by having that sold as a self-service really piqued the interest of our senior leadership team. It really helped that they are a friendly bunch, and actually you can have those discussions. So putting the business case together took a long time. It went through numerous iterations to really get it right in its articulation of exactly what it could do. In an ideal world, we should be using something for at least a year before we go for a business case, because then you can really understand what it does.
Right.
We don't get that as a luxury. You have to obviously get it signed off before you use it first. Trial periods are sometimes acknowledged and used. We didn't have that luxury. So it really was about identifying those true benefits. So for us, it was the compliance, the threat of HMRC coming after you, and then it was around the cost savings. What could it drive for the business, and how do you get something to either be cost neutral or cost positive? So by suggesting that using it competitively, we could save the fee that it would cost, essentially, in a down and dirty way. That's what ended up being the pass mark for it to be signed off.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And it's like you say, when you tie into that kind of overall value proposition and the savings side of it, there's quite a few different elements. There's the efficiency side of it. There's the risks, risk mitigation around potential fines for misclassification and things like that. But then there's savings around things like settlements, there's savings around things like getting better prices out of your suppliers because more of them are going through a competitive process.
Yep.
That's where it really starts to add up. And it's interesting what you said around not having had the luxury of running a trial period. that, I think, my own personal viewpoint is that if technology doesn't allow organizations, or if the service that people take on doesn't allow people to run a proof of concept when they want to, I think that can significantly hold a market back. And I feel like that's one of the things that's possibly happened in services procurement, where organizations, the spend is always big.
Yes.
So if you try and eat the whole elephant at once, that's tricky. The way that you guys have done it, where you've basically iterated, taken one area, build out to another area, build out to another area, I think that's been fantastic. Best practice evidence of how to do it and how to roll it out very successfully within an organization. But basically, if you try and eat the whole elephant at once, it just doesn't move. People just don't do it. And if the technology can't do it on a smaller scale to start with, or the service provider can't run a POC, I think that is a significant hurdle just for the broader industry. So it's something that, in terms of how we operate and how we operate with our MSP partners, like Mawson and others, that's something that I'm personally a strong advocate of in the market, because sometimes these business cases have to have that to start with, don't they?
They do, and it's an ideal world, right? But we did carve it up. We certainly didn't take it all on to start with. It would not have worked. Big Bang would not have worked in the behaviours that we have within our organisation. Within the technology area with engineering, I think it's safe to say that other people can resonate. It's relationships that have been there for 20, 25 years, and they know who they like. They get to know each other's kids, for Christ's sake.
Yeah.
It's quite incestuous in our area. So it's taking sections and going, right, let's trial it. You can have a voice. You use it. Why don't you give us feedback once you've used it? And by empowering the users, where it's not just a dictatorship, that's really helped. And it's something that I'm really keen on, and I do tell the stakeholders during training that if you've got ideas, then it can morph, it can change. This isn't rigid. And if you've got a voice it. I'm not here to dictate to you. I'm here to give you a route that is compliant.
Yep.
But if you have ideas on what's missing, let me know. And that does build a really good adherence to what we're doing. It buys
trust.
people in, and it's massive trust. That's a really good way of putting it, because you're not invalidating people's thoughts or beliefs on what they're doing operationally. You're saying, we need to do this because of X, Y, Z, but actually if we need to tweak it, if we need to bend it to do something that it's not currently doing, articulate it to us, tell us, and we can work together. And that having that advocate on board as well during rollout helped significantly.
Yeah, and that sort of feedback, when it comes into whether it's the MSP or whether it's us as a technology provider, is hugely beneficial, because I think one of the things that we've both identified as being extremely important within services procurement is flexibility.
Yes.
Ultimately, the underlying workflow of a statement of work, the underlying services procurement process, is pretty standardized across organizations, across industries. It's the way that contractual vehicle operates, but there's a lot of configuration that needs to be considered around that, which is where the complexity comes into it, because every organization works differently. If you're in the chemicals industry versus engineering versus media, there's different things that need to be taken into consideration, even if the underlying concept is still very much the same, which is where, certainly from my point of view, I'm very passionate about the need for specialist technology to solve this problem, because it's different to contingent workforce. You're not just buying an individual's time, you're buying an output from a service provider, whatever that output might be. And it's massive. It's worth a huge amount of money. It's like 20 trillion global spend. So this for me is where it's really interesting to see the market trying to understand how they need to actually segment this and address it separately. And it brings me back to the point I was making earlier about, ultimately, with you guys, it's a great example of a contingent workforce program and a services procurement program basically working beautifully in tandem. The VMS process works beautifully for that side of it. The services procurement process goes through a dedicated services procurement system in Zivio, and it basically has a nice entry point that pushes people down the right route, and then obviously you can collect your data and analyze the numbers at the end of it in a centralized view. So I think that is another area where people assume it's going to be more complicated than it needs to be. But really what you guys have done a great job of working with the Mawson team and our team is to engineer a user experience that actually works for people, takes into consideration the type of processes that you have in place, how Telent operate as a business, the requirements that are specific to that. And ultimately, I would like to think you've made people's lives easier in terms of the buying process.
Really hope so. You'd have to ask all of them, Johnny. But it's the flexibility and the ease is crucial if you're going to sell anything to any stakeholder. And it's been great, actually. It's been hard, and it's not going to solve world peace or anything like that. But it's been really good because it's fascinating how to bend and mold into different requirements, and that back to our original point of what intrigues me, which is problem solving, what drives me, it is all around that. So yeah, it's been really good.
And what about the supplier angle? Because that's something where people also, like you say, there's long-term relationships, but I think there's kind of a lot to it in the sense that, if you look at before and after, are some suppliers in a much better position now where they're not missing out on stuff? And people have these concerns, but from your point of view, what's the supplier element of that journey been like?
Oh, that's a good one, because it was quite sticky to start with.
Yeah.
Resistance to change. We've always done it this way. Don't understand why you're making us do more work. And again, it's perception over reality. What does it actually mean from a step-by-step process for them to essentially get paid?
Yeah.
And when you break it down into, okay, you've potentially had arguments or discussions to get yourself paid for other jobs, but actually if I can say to you, if you go down this route, then you're far more likely to get paid for what you've actually done because it's been articulated properly, because there's been key milestones. You've then stuck to what you said you were going to do, far easier to get paid. And that's really been my mantra about it. It's once you get up to speed with using anything, mobile phones, we're both of a similar age where mobile phones were new to us after our initial teenage years, and it's just getting used to something. As soon as you get used to something, it becomes easier, it becomes second nature. So again, it's just articulating that to people, saying, yes, this is quite painful right now. I acknowledge that, but give it time and give it 6 months, and before you know it, it's just part of your routine. And that's what we have found. What they do love, which we've had feedback is, because of the way we're utilising the information, is you get a supplier profile.
Yeah.
It's their sales pitch.
Yeah.
And that goes to the whole of the business. That's there and available. And what we've done to really elevate that is we're going to start using spotlights. So on intranet pages and within the business, it's kind of going and it's taking that profile. The supplier owns it. I don't need to chase them. It's that is their carrot to say, keep your profile updated, and then we'll use that as a spotlight to tell the business what you do, what you're available for doing, because where we're quite rigid in what the suppliers are allowed to do from a safety perspective and compliance, and this enables us to go, right, well, they can do this. If you want that, let's get them audited. Let's get that skill set flagged in the system for them to be able to do. And what it does is it reduces that scope creep on site where they haven't actually been audited for doing that work. And things like that do happen. Life happens, but we're trying to then utilise some of the aspects within Zivio to help with that. And that's what's been really key. And that's actually a really good point that the suppliers, some of them have actually said, this is really good. We've not seen this before.
Yeah.
And so it helps us, but it also helps them. So yeah, it's fab. And it's just pulling these things out and working with it in quite a creative way.
Yeah. And that to me sounds like proper collaboration.
Yeah.
Ultimately they are an extended part of your organisation. I had a great conversation with a chap called Neil Burton recently, who's ex-EY, and he described this term of the extended enterprise.
Yeah.
And I thought that was a great way to put it, because they are, fundamentally, you're all working as a team to get the job done for your end customer. So the ability to collaborate like that and actually recognise supplier performance where they're doing a great job, understand why changes are happening, because it might not be the supplier's fault that something gets extended or delayed, or it could be all sorts of factors that play into it. Having that clarity and that transparency, again, like you say, it's perception versus reality. Sometimes people look at that and go, oh, my supply chain won't like that, or suppliers might think, oh, hang on, are we being, you're kind of, putting us under the microscope here. But ultimately, it's about understanding what's required, delivering on promises, and actually having the opportunities to do great work and be recognised for it.
Absolutely. And I've been there having conversations with people where the supplier said, nope, not doing it. I don't want to be part of this. And it's, well, why not? What have you got to hide? If you've got nothing to hide, if you're genuine in what you believe you can provide to me as a service, you'd do this no problem. And I think that for me has been quite insightful as to that conversation, which I'm hoping other people can resonate with, which is, well, I've used him for years. Well, that's great and appreciate that. However, if they're not willing to come onto a system and actually prove what they can do, then there's something a bit fishy about that.
Yeah.
So therefore, let's not use them. So it can really work. Putting something like this in place can really help you understand that supply chain, weed out the ones that aren't applicable anymore, create great relationships with the ones that you want to, build that strategy with your business units. What are we going to do in the next 5 years? Okay, who are we going to use? What's the capacity of all of those suppliers? Are we putting too much in with one supplier? Okay, let's go somewhere else. Do we have the ability to use the tool and mould it to do something completely different, like safety critical, that isn't statement of works, it's an availability measure? It's really just taking that roadmap and that maturity path that I'm so much enjoying right now to really get it to work for the business and the suppliers. And they have fed back that it's really working. They are getting paid. And for me, that's a win-win.
Yeah, and like you say, it creates more visibility of those suppliers and their capabilities across your organisation that they wouldn't have if they're just in somebody's black book.
Absolutely.
I think the other side of it that's really interesting and something that I'm very passionate about in the market is, there are lots of reasons why organisations should address services procurement.
Yeah.
I'd say primarily because for most organisations, like literally most organisations that I see, this is a manual or semi-manual process. They don't have control. They don't have visibility. It's all over the place. And it's a big area of spend. On average, it's like 50% of organisational spend across industries, locations, etc. But the ability to actually have a strategic understanding of how you're going to get work done in the future, that's the most critical thing to me. And it's like, can you actually get stuff done? Can you get it done when you need to? Yeah. Can you actually take on new tasks that require new skills? How flexible and adaptable are you to that? And if an organisation has no control or visibility over their services supply chain, they are going to lose. They are going to be outcompeted by people who are doing it properly, like you guys, where you have the ability to go to market effectively and get work done. So I think that's the ultimate business driver for me. There are obviously things like misclassification that are very strong drivers, compliance, risk, financial risk, all sorts of other things. But ultimately, in the grand scheme of things, when everything's moving as quickly as it is right now, for the suppliers as well, they're going to miss out on stuff if they're not doing things effectively and they're not using automation and AI where it is relevant. I just think that's the stark reality of it to me is you take company A and company B, both of them spend loads of money on buying services and getting work done in that way, and it's something that's generally increasing in the market, that kind of output-based delivery. If company A has got it nailed, they've got a really dialed-in process and they've got visibility and data, they're going to outcompete company B.
Yeah, they will. And what ties into that as well, which is really a hot topic at the moment, and that is skills. You've got aged population in the tech space.
Yeah.
And, we're going to see quite a lot of retirements coming up in the next 5-10 years. and it's that knowledge and that skill set that's lost. There are a lot of, especially in the public sector, as you know, there's not a huge amount of money and investment, as we can all listen to with the budgets. So it's about sweating assets as well in certain industries. If you lose that technology experience and knowledge, and you haven't got sight of what your suppliers are doing to make sure that they have those skill sets, apprenticeship programs, learning, training, if you don't have the time, the capacity, or even a list of who you need to go to have those conversations, how can you ever be ready for a 5-year plan? And, to your point, you'll just push yourself out of the market, because if you've then got to be only reactive in that moment in time to go to a supplier base and say, can you do this for me in the technology realm, they quite frankly could turn around and go, well, we don't have that anymore, because they all retired over the last 5 years. So yes, it's imperative that we know what our suppliers are doing. What's their roadmaps? How are they going to make sure that they're going to be around and being able to support in the industry 5-10 years from now?
Yeah, and it comes back to that overall work capacity and capability. The organisation has what they can do with their internal teams.
Yeah.
They have their contract and temp arrangements. They maybe engage some freelancers or have a direct sourcing program for some contingent workers. And then they have their services supply chain, all of which fit into a kind of skills or capability matrix where the organisation, if it has the right data and it has the right processes, can be agile and say, here's some work, what's the best way for us to do it? Last year, this is how we filtered all the different work through all the different work delivery channels. This is what we're going to focus on this year. This is what we're going to highlight. These are the areas of risk. These are the areas of opportunity. It's just doing proper business, really, isn't it? It's being effective.
Absolutely. I've had one supplier that decided to get accredited in a completely different field because they had the right access rights to sites.
Okay.
But they then upskilled themselves in something different. Well, that's just enabled them to get more business because they've had that foresight into, well, not many other people are there, are they? Let's upskill our own teams. While some industries are not spending the money at the moment, which we do have in some of our customer bases because they are public organisations, then what are they going to do with their staff? Their workers, how are they going to feed that so they stick around and they don't go to another competitor down the road? So by upskilling and sort of cross-pollinating an engineer to do different engineering activities in a different area, that to me is brilliant. That is an example of how it should work, because they've had that conversation with us openly about what's on our roadmap and what can they do to be part of that.
And it's that two-way collaboration that really makes the magic happen, because if you're saying to them, okay, these are some of the requirements we're going to have coming down the line, you've made them aware of that now. Yeah. They can make those decisions. They can invest in that themselves without that ability to communicate. And I think, again, it comes back to that self-service nature. Something that's absolutely core to us at Zivio is enabling that self-service, not just for the buying population, but also for the supply chain.
Yeah, absolutely.
And actually, that's where procurement can sit in the middle, and they can be very hands-off, or they can layer on a bit more control where required, but ultimately they can orchestrate the process, and they can have visibility, and they can add their value, and then it just pushes everything into a completely different way of operating.
Yeah.
Nice. Okay, so we know that this is great for companies to do this, and you've had a fantastic experience of making it happen, and the reality and the great results that you guys are getting from it, and all the stuff you're kind of. I love the fact, when I have these conversations with you, it's very always about what's next, which I think is fantastic, because I think that's more helpful for people in the market, in the sense that you're very honest about the challenges, the trials and tribulations, the journey that you've been on. But if you look around the market and you look at other organisations that might be at a very early stage of, like a complete immaturity with services procurement, what do you think what would you imagine are the key things that are holding them back?
How to articulate to a budget holder, senior leaders, on what is available in the market to actually solve that problem. It's quite daunting. I think it doesn't matter how senior you are, it's really daunting trying to bring someone along a journey that you might have in your head, you might have a PowerPoint presentation, but until you can actually articulate properly for that business, not for someone else's business, but for yours, how that's going to impact and drive a benefit, no matter what benefit that is. We've spoken about compliance, cost, savings, and all of that. You know, I think it's just starting the conversation. And if I was to give my 2 pennies worth for it, it's having a conversation with yourselves, for example, and going, right, this is my problem statement. How you've got experience with multiple companies putting this in place. What have others done? And I'm all for using people in a nice way, obviously, for their expertise. You know, we all don't know everything, and ego should not be part of this whatsoever. And it's really trying to understand what your status is now. And I think that's sometimes even quite hard to articulate, because it can be quite daunting. Lots and lots of noise. You know your spend, and then you're going, but I don't know what all of them do. So it's really, it is starting with that. What's your need? What's your bucket? Why do you buy services? You know, is your organisation basically don't want to get loads of permanent people? Do they want to go down the contingent worker route and have them sitting in your team? Or do you truly need it outsourced and deliverable based? And then once you can start to carve that up as a landscape through your organisation, you can then go, okay, Johnny, right, it's time for a chat. How are we going to use technology to aid us in getting clarity, compliance, a better relationship with our supply chain, a better relationship with your stakeholders? Don't forget, they love it when we know as a procurement person what they do.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
I think there's some great advice in there, yeah, and like you say, it's getting started. I like the way you put across that kind of like segmenting the landscape and understanding that that kind of current status setup. And like you say, it's understanding what's available in the market in terms of the various different technology vendors that there are that are addressing or crossing over with this space, and also understanding the service provider landscape as well, where more of the kind of traditionally like workforce solutions companies or staffing organizations are bringing in specific procurement expertise. You know, in some cases, specifically services procurement SMEs to help them, which is fantastic to see. Because obviously they're making that transition from looking after the contingent workforce side of things for organisations to then starting to say, okay, well, we can actually help you with your services supply chain. It is different. They'll use different processes. They'll use different expertise. They'll use different technology in a lot of cases. But it can be done, as is evidenced by what you guys have achieved. And I think it is a real opportunity, because companies, you know, why would they, you know, take on a service, an external service to help with this side of things? Well, there's a lot of compliance and there's a lot of moving parts to it, and procurement teams are pretty lean. So if you bring in a service provider who's also underpinning it with technology, then that can really get you off the ground and get you moving and allow the procurement team to do what they need to do. So I think it feels like that awareness of what service providers are there out there, how can they help you, what technology is available in the market to try and solve these problems. And then it's not going to be a one size fits all. For each organisation, they can look at what's going to work for them. But that's why I think these sort of conversations, hearing what you've got to say, is so important, because it's just making people aware of the fact that there are solutions out there.
100%. Go to roundtables, you know, go and speak to peers in the industry, use LinkedIn. It's knowledge gathering. The more you know, the better you can articulate and the better choices you can make, because you're right. One size does not fit all. I know that entirely is 100% correct. And I'm lucky that we have found a solution that means that we can be agile against our requirements. But yeah, it is about just getting out there, listening to podcasts, and really sort of understanding, like you say, what is out there, what's the art of the possible.
Yeah, and it's brilliant. I'm so pleased to see more voices in the market now. more people talking about this and articulating it, and just, if people can come together and discuss the problems that exist around it, that's, hugely beneficial. And, in some cases, you look at those type of conversations, it's quite therapeutic for people, because people sometimes are sitting there in their organisation maybe feeling slightly isolated, feeling like, oh, we're the only ones with this problem, this is a complete mess, or this is this how do other people have these problems? And actually recognising that these are problems that exist in most organisations, and obviously every organisation is slightly different, but these are problems that exist across the board in what I see. So I think just having these peer-to-peer conversations, it just opens up that potential for people to think, okay, there's an opportunity to address this.
Yeah, and no question is a stupid question.
Yeah, and one of the things that I think is quite interesting is that I think it takes a certain type of person to even want to address services in the first place. So, say, problem-solving mentality, but also, kind of got to be a little bit willing to put your head above the parapet, haven't you?
Yeah, you gotta have some balls.
You got to take a bit of risk, haven't you?
And girls can have that too.
100%.
You're right. It's I think it helps if you've got not necessarily a passion for it, but if you're really interested in it, as well as a subject matter, plus then, you're a bit of a problem solver. I'm a massively creative person, so I see it from a lens of problem solving, but how can I make it something joyous for people? Because that's where I go to. I get eye rolls all the time from engineers, but with a bit of humour, we can get past it. So, I think just go for it. Start the conversations, and don't be scared to have really detailed, non-glamorous conversations. And what I mean by that is, to the point of, well, what did you put in your PowerPoint to actually get that message across? Because we can all have these very high level conversations of put a business case together, but someone might not even know where to start with that.
Yeah.
And I think it's really key. And what I've had feedback on is keep it relatable when we're having these conversations. Don't gatekeep things. There is no need for that whatsoever. There is opportunities for us all in our professions. So let's actually get down to the nitty gritty. What did you say? What areas did you take as sort of your benefit profile? What was said back? What kind of questions did you get asked from your board? Things like that. Why can't we have those granular, detailed conversations? Why does it have to be, someone speaks out of a thesaurus? I think I get really frustrated sometimes with some of those conversations where it feels like gatekeeping because they're just using really big words.
Yeah.
But actually, let's get into the detail, because we should be helping each other.
Yeah, exactly. There's nothing to be lost between organisations by sharing best practice on this sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And it elevates the procurement function.
Yeah.
And it's interesting now starting to see more dedicated roles specifically looking at the procurement of services across organisations.
Yeah.
It's something I find fascinating, because coming from more of a procurement technology angle rather than being a practitioner by background, I look at the way that organisations buy things, and I just very simply, from a technology perspective, I break it down and say, well, this is how organisations buy goods, where you're buying a simple or relatively simple thing. It's simple in the sense that you can identify what it is, you can measure it, you can compare it, all those sorts of things, but it's got a complicated supply chain. So that's one set of problems that needs to be solved by technology in a certain way, which is actually very well solved by the kind of traditional procurement suite, where you've got your guided buying, your kind of cataloguing and all this sort of stuff. Yep. Then organisations buy people. So you're named individual for a period of time, contractors, temps, all that sort of stuff. That, again, is a very well-solved technical solution. You've got your vendor management system providers that actually manage that process, that have been around for 20 plus years now. So that's a fairly well-solved problem. And then you've got the way that organisations buy services, where it's the reverse of goods, simple supply chain, but complex thing, hard to define, hard to measure, hard to compare. So I kind of look at the way that organisations buy things and say, you're either buying a thing, a person, or a service. But the way that procurement is traditionally broken down within organisations doesn't necessarily reflect that, or hasn't reflected that. And it's more taken from a point of view of direct, this is indirect.
Yes.
But both of them could be a mix, and it depends what kind of organisation you are. If you're a manufacturing organisation, within your direct spend is going to be more goods and materials. If you're a consulting firm or a building consulting firm, for example, your direct spend is all going to be services, because it's basically going to be subcontracted architectural consultancy, engineering consultancy, building consultancy.
You have a mix.
Yeah.
So you can have a subcontract which defines that you need equipment and you don't want to free issue it. So you want them to take full on that responsibility of buying the goods to do the job as well. But that brings in complexity. So you're right, it's not not simple, and the way that you need to articulate it in your terms and conditions or contract or framework, then you've got flow downs potentially from your own customer on how you want that subcontractor to behave on site. But what we've done and implemented, which is another decision tree, so it's around that complexity. So if you have more than 40% equipment in your request, you have to come to procurement, because that enables us then to go and do your bill of materials and get you the right prices. We use Cisco, HPE and stuff like that. That comes with its own complexities from our contractual relationships with them. So in that decision tree, we have built a complexity matrix that if you tick one or more of those boxes, then you utilise procurement. We've got the expertise to really help you buy it in the right way. We still might say, actually, do you know what, we'll take that bit separate but put the rest through the Zivio route. But it gives the ability for us to review that complex requirement first. But if you don't tick any of those, then you can just walk on straight through and just do it yourself.
Yeah. So and that's where I'm seeing some change in the market, where rather than necessarily having a purely direct versus indirect approach, or obviously most organizations are working on a category strategy. Some of those services will go across multiple categories.
It does, yeah.
But seeing more organizations taking a route to say, this is how we need to address services, is really interesting, because it's an evolution of how procurement look at the world. Yeah. And I find that really fascinating. Talking about evolution.
Yes.
I want to just come on to an area that I know you've got a particular interest. I know you're always interested in technology, and you're very interested in the AI side of things. In terms of where you see this going, the future of this, what do you see as a kind of future roadmap for your own organisation and also for the market? And how do you see AI potentially playing into that?
That's such a good question. So at the moment, we're utilising it for people that don't know how to write scopes properly, or it's something that they just need a refresher on maybe. And the way in which AI has helped us is say, go play with it.
Yeah.
Go use it. Put in your requirement. Look, copy paste if your customer has sent you something, copy paste that in if you need to. But see what AI triggers as a set of considerations. So we all know that there's gaps in AI still. You should never just not read it and use it. But what the AI is doing is going, right, I'm taking what your question is, and I'm going to give you a template scope, and these are considerations you need to make. Well, 9 times out of 10, a lot of our stakeholders don't know that you've got to consider what your milestones are going to be versus any special criteria that you need. And what the AI is doing is giving you examples so it can bring it to life. This all drives the ability to send to a set of suppliers a scope that makes complete sense and enables good in, good out. If you put rubbish in, you get rubbish out, and then you're just in a whole world of pain. So that's great. We also have the ability to then analyse what the supplier sends back from a risk profile. How cool is that?
Yeah.
So you can then, if you don't have procurement sat on your shoulder reviewing it, because this is all about self-service with guardrails, we can use that analyzer of an AI to go, okay, well, the supplier has put all this in. One, what am I missing? So what risk does that mean for me as a business, as a purchaser? What does that do? Because it's taking into consideration what you've asked as your exam question, and then it's gone, well, your supplier has answered this, these are the gaps. Honestly, it's next level. And I think, from the fact that we in procurement, we need to be used for the more complex, the more strategic stuff. This is great. This basically tells that stakeholder what their risks could potentially be, and it gives them that learning curve as well to be better in the future. I think it's great, and if we can get AI to streamline and take the noise and eventually learn from all of what gets put in over a couple of years from that business. So say from our business, what we ask for, because we sometimes do get quite a lot of repetitive requirements. Well, eventually you could just say, I need a CCTV installation, and it will automatically come up with something that has been built on previous knowledge that has been input into the system. So again, time saving, gives good in, you get good out.
Yeah, and it's amazing how taking that information that's specific to your organization, that's kind of like, kept within the boundaries of your organization,
Yes.
and then augmenting it with all of the other information that an AI large language model will have access to, you're basically just, you're using the maximum amount of data possible to try and make the right decisions. I had a really interesting conversation recently listening to some kind of procure tech investors talking about AI. There's talk about the AI bubble at the moment, and I think there's, it seems pretty obvious that some of the AI investments are overvalued at the moment, but ultimately this still is a complete, industrial revolution kind of type change that's occurring. But it was interesting listening to, tech companies that are kind of saying, well, if we're raising investment with a VC, how front and center should AI be? And it was really interesting to hear the responses of like, well, it's not just about AI, it's about what problem are you solving? And I think from our point of view, the ability to use AI at different points within that services procurement lifecycle to create a better user journey has been absolutely game changing for us, in the sense that it's not kind of putting the AI first, it's putting the problem first.
Yes.
What's the problem? And like you say, in being able to analyze responses, flag risks, help with scope creation, help with supplier recommendations and understanding background and things like that, summarizing bids and things like that. All it does is it just adds to the process of what a human is doing, and actually just creates efficiencies.
Speeds it up.
Yeah.
I don't know if anyone else can resonate with this, but the amount of times I've spent hours putting stuff into Excel on a comparison of rates and tasks and time it takes to do that task, to understand what my suppliers are giving me actually makes perfect sense against how many hours it takes to lay certain meters of cable. and to have AI that can just streamline that for me. Why wouldn't you? It's a tool that makes my life easier. It's nothing to be feared of if you're using it in that capacity. Would I want it to make my life choices? Absolutely not. But from a very task perspective, why are we not making life easy for ourselves? Because that's where it comes into its own, making the tasks easier. So I've got more time to have conversations using that analysed data from my responses on my bid, and I can then be informed having those discussions and going, well, I can see where you're more expensive. I can see where you probably have misjudged how long it's going to take you to do that task because I know better. But it flags that up, and I think that's just great. That's where I see AI being truly of a benefit in our procurement world.
Yeah, and I think from a tech service provider point of view, the onus of responsibility on people like Zivio and any tech provider that's utilizing AI is to make it kind of more than the sum of its parts.
Yeah.
Effectively, it has to be weaving it into your process to make it add more benefit than the classic question of someone just saying, why wouldn't I just go and use ChatGPT?
Correct.
And this is where the background prompt engineering, it's fascinating. When I talk to our tech team and our brilliant CTO about this sort of stuff, the advancements that we're making on a month-to-month basis are incredible, but the technicalities of what actually happens behind the scenes in terms of how, as a tech organization, we're talking to the APIs of these large language models and guiding them on the prompts and building safeguards and specific templating into it and making it specific to a dedicated purpose and solving the specific problem you're trying to solve. There's a massive amount to that. We could never do what a large language model does, but the value is in how we leverage that and how we weave it into the process so the end user doesn't need to think about it, and it's just seamless and they're just getting these benefits added in.
Yeah, you don't need to be a chat GPT. You don't. That's not, like you say, that's not the intention. It's around how do you make it bespoke enough, safe enough for the users to use in the environment. I'd much rather have an AI tool that learns in a closed environment my business, because that's going to be beneficial to me. If I use ChatGPT or Copilot for the business activities, one, I've got to be really careful what I put into a global learning tool, and two, the amount of discrepancies that still happen is astronomical, especially from a legal point of view. So having it closed in that environment and the work that you put into it, even by just using it at the moment, we can see that it's not just putting something into a larger language tool.
Yeah, exactly. And you know, the difference between using, like, for example, the ChatGPT playground, where it is using data to train the model, versus the APIs. If you're using a corporate API, it's not using data to train the model. So that you're looking at, you know, Microsoft, for example, it's all on Azure. It's a similar sort of, you know, kind of security setup to using Teams or Outlook. So that's something that, you know, is a massive consideration, which is where things like that Microsoft tie-up with OpenAI is hugely beneficial, and that helps a lot of organizations be able to leverage this type of tool. So listen, in terms of how the rest of the market can kind of can take encouragement from the great work that people like yourself are doing and your team are doing and your organization are doing, and how that moves forwards. You've brought up some really useful points for how people can get started. What do you think is going to be the thing that kind of changes this in the market? I know you recently spoke at a round table talking on these sorts of topics. What sort of questions were you getting from people in the market?
How to start.
Right.
How to start. What problems did I come up against? And has it done what I needed it to do? And the answer was it was really hard. It was complex. But with the right team behind you and coming to experts in the field, it made it a lot simpler and a nicer experience. So it was very much just start. If I can say anything, just start. Start with your own internal landscape. What is it that you currently have in your buckets? What do you have in your contingent? What do you have as services? Do you buy just people, but sometimes they're disguised? It's okay to not be right, because there's ways to solve it. So if you find that you've got loads of disguised labour, HMRC, but if you do, you can solve it and you can rectify it. It's not insurmountable. So just start, and, you know, happy to have a chat with anyone if they want. I'm not gatekeeping. It really is just start.
Brilliant. And so in terms of how people can engage that sort of conversation in the market, like you say, you're happy to have a conversation with people. How can people find you? On LinkedIn, I assume?
LinkedIn, yep, I am there. And that's the best avenue. Or, you know, just listen to this podcast over and over again.
well, the one other thing I was going to ask was, so you talked about the fact that, so to kind of close off and kind of bring our conversation round to a close, the thing for me that I think would be really interesting to understand, and hopefully for other people as well, is, so you said, you know, it was hard, it's been a tricky journey, but my question to you is, if you, with all the knowledge that you've got having done it once, if you were suddenly parachuted as a kind of like procurement SWAT team into another organisation and presented with the same kind of like ultimate problem to solve, how much easier would it be? It's always going to be complex, but how much easier would it be having been through the process once?
So much easier, because you can trust yourself. You can trust your own knowledge and thoughts on disparaging people that might put up a fight. So if you've got people that are very rigid in the way that they think and say, no, it won't work, it won't work, it won't work. If you haven't been through that process, then you're more likely to go, oh, maybe then, I'll be put off. Wouldn't have that. So if I can help anyone in their position looking at this for the first time and they have got negative minis that basically say, that won't work, happy to have a chat, because believe in it, we've done it, and it does work. It really does. Are people always going to be happy? No, people don't like change, but it does get better. You just have to keep it, just keep going.
No, that's absolutely fantastic, and I really appreciate you coming on to share those views, and I think it's really important to get this message across, that ultimately it's about sharing the knowledge.
It is,
and once more people understand the process that companies and people like yourself have been through, they'll feel encouraged. They'll be braver with the decisions they make and more confident in having those conversations.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we've been talking now for quite a few months, and we both end up coming away feeling really empowered and thinking of, oh yeah, we discussed that, didn't we? So that's brilliant. To me, that is completely worthwhile. So let's, open it all up.
Perfect. Well, it's exactly what this podcast is all about. I'm so grateful to you for coming on board.
No, you're welcome.
Thank you very much. And and no doubt we will be able to have a bit more of an updated chat at some point in the future.
Yeah, let's do it. Thanks, Johnny.
Thank you.